Hey, human geographers. We're still talking about topic 1.1, Introduction to Maps. At this time, we are going to focus on the second essential learning. So remember, this is the information that I get from College Board, and then I teach it to you. So types of spatial patterns represented on maps is what we are focusing on in this video. And you're probably like, Ms. Pavley, what the heck is a spatial pattern, right? Well, that's what we're explaining. So let's talk about the first ones. Throughout this video and throughout this course, we're going to use the terms absolute and relative a lot. And so every time that I am talking about something that's absolute, this means that it is exact, precise, measurable. So in order to find absolute location on a map, I could use things like a specific address, 3200 Ebenezer Road, right? Or I could use coordinates like latitude and longitude. So if you check out this map here, you can see all of, not all, but a lot of major cities represented. And using this global grid of latitude and longitude, I can find just about anywhere. And so, for example, if I look at Rio de Janeiro, right, it is found at 23 degrees south, right? This is latitude. So I find 23 degrees. I go all the way over. There's Rio de Janeiro. And it's also found at 43 degrees west. That's the other side of the coordinate. And so that's longitude, right? So longitude is long, up and down. And so right here, you can see the 45 degrees. So I go all the way down and follow my 43 degrees west. And then I stop here at my 23 degrees south, and there is Rio de Janeiro. So do you see how that's exact? It's measurable, right? Now, when something is relative, it has to do, when a location is relative, it has to do with that location's relationship to another place or location. It may also have to do with the relationship between the person themselves and that location. So, for example, I could say, Salem Gardens is right next to my house, right? That's like a hometown sports bar that's very near me, right? So do you see how that's relative to my relationship with that location? Another way to talk about relative location would be to say something like Oak Hills High School is located between Work and Lawrence. Do you see how I didn't give that exact address, right? I situated Oak Hills between Work Road and Lawrence Road. And I'm saying, Oak Hills is in relation to those two places. So spatial patterns on maps are also in absolute distance and relative distance. So do you see how, we talked about location, now we're going to talk about distance. Now, what I mean by that is an example of absolute distance is exact, precise, measurable. So things like miles, kilometers, feet. For example, Oak Hills High School is 21.3 miles from my house, right? This is exact. You also are going to be able to find absolute distance on the map scale, right? Right here is what the map scale looks like. It's expressed in a ratio. Like 1 inch is 62,500 miles, maybe. Right? A graphic scale. So here's another example. So each one of these kind of notches represents a mile, or a verbal scale, just written out. 1 inch equals 1 mile, right? So again, you're going to find absolute distance on the map scale. Okay. Now, even if I go back here, right there is the map scale. It's on almost every single map. You probably just have never really paid attention to it before. Now, if I'm talking relative distance, right, this really has to do with, again, relationships. Remember, relative relationships. And it has to do with spatial interaction. So connections, contacts, movement, flow between places despite their absolute difference. Now, you're probably like, what do you mean, right? An example of relative difference, I think the best example is discussing Amazon, right? Amazon has drastically decreased relative distance between consumers and products. No longer do I have to, drive 25 minutes to Walmart to see if they have a product that I'm interested in. I can now just, pop on my phone, go to my Amazon app, and order whatever I want whenever I want, and it will be at my house in 2 days. Right? This is an example of relative distance. The relative different distance between me and, maybe I don't know, what did I last buy? The bookstore, right? Um, is no longer far because Amazon has bridged that difference. It doesn't matter how many miles away the bookstore is. I'm still going to get my books in 2 days. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about now direction. So far we've talked about location, distance, and now direction. Again, absolute direction is exact, precise, measurable. So think your cardinal directions, north, east, south, and west, right? That's an example of absolute direction. Now, again, relative equals relationships. Relative direction is going to be how are you finding your way on a map or verbally, excuse me, having to do with some sort of relationship to that location. And so, excuse me, I have the hiccups. For example, let's say I'm trying to give you directions somewhere. Okay. And I tell you to turn left at the target and then go right at the second stop sign. That's relative direction, right? Because you know where the target's located, you can count the stop signs. That's different than me saying, I need you to go 2 miles north and then turn left and go 3 miles east, right? So those are the differences between absolute direction and relative direction. Remember, we're still talking about the types of spatial patterns that you can find by looking at maps. Okay, now we're really getting into what does spatial mean, right? What are spatial patterns? Here are some examples of spatial patterns. Are locations or is spatial data clustered, right? And when geographers say clustered, they mean are those things close together, right? And another way to talk about clustering is density, because density means the number of that spatial variable in a specific area, right? So, like for instance, this is an example of clustered homes, right? I could say the same exact thing, but say that these 3 streets or these 4 streets are densely populated, right? So clustering and density go together. The next type of spatial pattern is distribution, right? Or dispersal. So it's just the opposite of clustering. Are spatial variables far apart? Okay. And so, a distribution is just the way that something is spread out. So if again I look at these examples, right, I would say that these houses are distributed, right? Or they are dispersed, whereas these houses are clustered. Does that make sense? And then finally, when we talk about patterns, right? Um, Patterns are big in human geo. We are always looking for patterns. And so this is an indication that two or more spatial variables, things, are related or go together. Okay. So just like when you see, a pattern on like my shirt, right? I have a striped pattern on my shirt. That means that these stripes are interrelated, right? Um, we're going to see the same exact thing for geographic phenomena on maps. All right, so we are all done with the types of spatial patterns that we see on maps. So these include absolute and relative distance, absolute and relative direction, absolute and relative location, and then clustering, dispersal, and those spatial associations are